Islam is one of the fastest growing religions in the world. This is especially true in America. However, it is the most questioned and the least understood. Some Americans are even under the impression that Islam is mainly a religion for immigrants. So can you start off by telling us about the history of American Muslims, their origins, and the ethnic groups of the Muslim population in America?
Yeah, very good. The history of Islam in this country is a history of various waves of Muslims from various parts of the entire world coming here. The United States is a nation of immigrants, and the Muslim population started walking upon the North American continent as early as 889 of the Common Era. It is evidence that in 889, Qashqash ibn Sa'id from Iberia, from the Andalus, the Spanish peninsula, actually came to the United States and traveled back to Al-Andalus. He was a Moor, and of course Islam dominated the Iberian Peninsula for over 800 years. We also find that in the 1300s, as early as 1310, that a West African Muslim king by the name of Abu Bakr I traveled with over 2,000 ships and thousands of men to the landing in South and Central America. And there's evidence that their excursion took them as far north as Canada. There's evidence that there are cave writings in California and Arizona about how these Muslims traded with the Native Americans and intermarried with the Native Americans and actually became absorbed in many instances with these Native American tribes. There are over 565 cities, towns, and villages across the United States that have names of Islamic or Arabic origin. One of the most fascinating stories about this interaction between Native Americans and the Muslim population that had immigrated here is that the story of the Cherokee Nation, which was a part of the Iroquois Nation. And the Cherokees in North Carolina, South Carolina, and parts of Georgia, until the 1832, actually wore full Islamic garb. The men wore turbans with a feather on it. The women wore long dresses. In 1867, there was a treaty that was signed by Muhammad ibn Abdullah, and this was a treaty of peace and friendship between the United States government, 1887, I'm sorry, the United States government and the Cherokee Nation. Throughout the history, the colonial history of this country, there's evidence, like with the advent of so many Muslims from West Africa coming into this country, there's evidence that Turkish and Mandinka African names and places were introduced into the Algonquin and Tuscarora and other Native American tribes. The Seminole tribe is also a very interesting phenomena with this interaction with African Muslims by the way of the dress of the Muslim, of the natives, as well as the practices of not eating pork and these kinds of things. I also want to point out that from the period of the transatlantic slave trade, at least 1 out of every 3 Africans who were brought into the Western Hemisphere, and particularly in the United States, were Muslim. And this has a long documentation, even in the mass media, popular culture. There is some evidence of this, but it's a very well kept and even suppressed bit and page of American history. You find that in movies, the miniseries that appeared in television in the 1980s here in the States called Roots, it was the story about an African Muslim by the name of Kunta Kinte, who maintained his practice of Islam throughout his ordeal as a slave in this country. Steven Spielberg in 1997 made a movie called The Amistad, and it captured the essence of a takeover of a slave ship by West Africans, and eventually winning through the Supreme Court their freedom and going back to Africa. But what Spielberg left out is the documented fact that the majority of the African slaves on the Amistad were Muslim. So there, one other example in the movie that Denzel Washington starred in called Glory. There's also a very similar phenomena with the 55th, what was called the All-Colored Division. There was a Muslim by the name of Muhammad ibn Said who was a part of this very glorious fighting unit out of Massachusetts. So Islam has a very intimate relationship with the colonial history of this country, with various waves of immigration coming into this nation, starting as Muslims coming as early as 1875, continuing until this day.